So today we're talking Guard infantry tactics and in what circumstances you'd want to use Guardsmen, Conscripts or Veterans. Hello and welcome back to Auspex Tactics, where today we're talking Imperial Guard, hopefully the first of a few guarded videos that we'll be getting out over the next few weeks. Today I wanted to focus on the chaps who take on a galaxy of horrors with nothing but a bayonet and a flashlight, which I think has become a bit more of an interesting question since that FAQ shake-up happened and the Guardsmen and Veterans cost a few more points. In the video we'll quickly go over the units' differences, and then talk about which ones I think perform best in a few different circumstances, advancing units, backfield support squads, and damage dealing units to be delivered into the enemy. Plenty to talk about, so let's jump straight into it. So compared with at least a few other factions, Guardsmen are fairly lucky in having quite a few different options for their basic infantry guys. The exact same models can be used to fill out infantry, conscripts and veterans, and by adding a few special weapons you can use them for special weapon and command squads too. I would always consider the infantry squad the default to compare to. They're 55 points now, weirdly 5.5 points per model, and are honestly, despite this points increase, still really quite efficient compared with other similar pointed units. Compared with 5-point models, they've actually got decent range damage output, fair durability with that flak armor, leadership 7, access to some nice cheap special weapons, good orders to keep them flexible, and the all-important objectives secured. Towards the start of 8th edition they were actually really quite efficient damage dealers as well, but Codex Creepers caught up on them quite a bit. They're now a lot more useful for their durability and holding the line. Conscripts on the other hand are another troops choice. They're 20 to 30 models, sorry not 10 as I wrote here, and they're 5 points a model, so they are finally cheaper than infantry squads again. Basically conscripts really double down on just being bodies to hold the line. They have really poor damage output with ballistic skill 5+, a mere leadership 4, meaning that a lot more are going to run. Orders will only go off on a 4+, but they do retain OBSEC. Despite all of these hindrances, I still think that they have a decent role within the army though. We'll get onto that in just a second. Veteran squads are 65 points for 10 men. They're an elite choice, so no OBSEC, and you can only have 0 to 3 units as per the rule of 3. These guys are trying to be guardsmen who can be damage dealers as well, and really flexible access to a whole bunch of special weapons. They can take 3 in a unit, a heavy weapons team if they need to, and also other interesting options like shotguns or heavy flamers. Finally, we have our other damage dealing foot guardsmen, special weapons and command squads, both of which are very similar in terms of what they do. Best for popping up and frying you with special weapons, whether that's plasma or melter. Command squads basically have no durability but hit harder. Special weapon squads have a bit more durability but don't hit quite as hard point for point. So these are our contenders. Let's talk about how they do in a few battlefield roles. Firstly, let's talk about the core battle line of the Guard, the units that are going to need to advance into the midfield and try and wrest those all-important objectives away from the enemy. You have to push up to win 9th edition missions, and cheap, fairly tough Guardsmen can be good for holding the line and potentially screening out the enemy. For the main battle line, I'd mainly be considering between infantry squads and conscripts for this role. You want something that's going to be tough, and I'm just not sure it's worth your time investing up to veterans or special weapon squads and things. If they're seeded in amongst other normal infantry squads, they're likely just going to get shot first. I would still very much see the infantry squad as the default option. You get reliable orders, fairly decent point for point damage dealing, 17 lasgun hits at 12 inches per every 100 point invested, and you can throw in some cheap plasma or melter, which has a decent chance of making its points back over the course of the game. It's definitely viable to run them in chimeras for this role as well. Chimeras are very cheap now, and it can make them doubly hard to scrape off an objective if you have to gun through the chimera, and then the squad that piles out of it as well. The other squad I'd consider for the role would be conscripts, who as we mentioned definitely have worse damage dealing, only 13 lasgun hits at 12 inches per every 100 point of conscripts, and their orders are less reliable, though arguably a bit more powerful when they do go off, as each one order could be affecting up to 30 men rather than just 10. Generally point for point, besides a little bit of extra durability, conscripts don't compete with regular guardsmen incredibly well. The main reason to take them is because you can get really large units, and these have benefits all of their own. If you do just want to have loads of bodies to take and hold objectives, then conscripts do it very well in my opinion. Now they're a bit cheaper than guardsmen, I think they might get a bit more of a look in, and a couple of other changes in 9th edition have been a bit kinder to them. Failing a leadership test won't lose you literally half a unit like it could in 8th, and it's a lot easier for large units to take the advantage of light cover. You don't have to have the entire squad within cover to get the saves of it. You can just take saving throws on the ones that happen to be in cover, and they still get the advantages of light cover in area terrain. Very good for a big sprawling unit like these guys, as it would be hard to bunch them up into area terrain. The way that conscripts can get really efficient though is that they're great for single unit buffs. In particular, one of the best would be Psychic Barrier, take a 35-point Astropath, you can give your conscripts +1 to their saves each turn, so now your huge unit of 30 dirt cheap guardsmen all have 4+ armor, and if you really wanted to load up with tons of psychic spells, you could potentially take Night Shroud to get them -1 to hit at range, or you could even ally in an Inquisitor for some leadership buffs and giving them a 5+ invul save. Then, on top of giving them +1 with Psychic Barrier, you can also use the stratagem to take cover, 1 CP, and it's +1 to the armor save of all models in the unit. Take cover doesn't give you a cover save, it literally is just +1 saves, so it can stack with cover as well. This means that with 1 spell and 1 stratagem, for a turn you could have 3+ armor save conscripts, which even fairly efficient anti-infantry weapons are going to struggle to chew through. If you did manage to have the stars align and you get your unit into light cover, theoretically it's going to take a Space Marine army 405 unaugmented bolter shots to clear 150 points worth of conscripts. Pretty ludicrous numbers for such a cheap investment. Obviously they won't be quite that good if you can't get the entire unit in light cover, but provided you can at least get some of them in, then you can have conscripts with a 2+ save really quite easily. On top of this, a single blob of conscripts can be better at holding objectives than multiple infantry squads. Say you've got a unit that's advancing towards the objective, you might be able to just get 1 or 2 models on it if you advance at maximum. If that's a conscript squad, then the enemy's not going to be able to take them off until they've killed the other 28 models. If you're moving up with 3 infantry squads side by side and you just get 1 or 2 models on, your opponent can just focus down the unit that made it and has those models on the objective, and they don't have to bother about the others for clearing it. Large units give you some access to some other nice shenanigans, such as being able to remove casualties from wherever you want, maybe to make enemy charges longer, or keeping the most important models for screening alive. Overall, for advancing units, I think I would mainly use infantry squads, but a big unit or 2 of conscripts I think really isn't a bad choice in a guard list. They can really quite efficiently lock down an objective for a turn or 2, or for quite a cheap price tag in the grand scheme of things. Next, let's talk about backfield squads, to try and lock down home objectives while the rest of the army pushes up. For this, I think that quite a few options are pretty viable. Infantry squads are some of the best, they're nice and cheap, they have Auspex, and they can take a sniper rifle and a heavy weapon if you do want them to chip in some damage. Conscripts are maybe a bit more of an outside choice for this. They're not going to be dealing pretty much any damage whatsoever, but sometimes that isn't the worst thing. They can just be dedicated objective holders, get the most bodies per point on the board, and they have quite a nice big unit footprint as well to screen out enemy deep strikers. Veteran squads I think come into their own here. The heavy weapon fire that they get each turn will be quite accurate at ballistic skill 3+, and you can throw in some special weapons on top of that. Either things like grenade launchers or sniper rifles are quite good, something with at least 24-inch range. They're likely to be a bit safer throughout the course of the game compared with being on the front lines. Hopefully if you've got a fair few pressing threats moving up towards the enemy, they can just be ignored for most of the game and sit around plinking away with their accurate weapons. Losing Auspex isn't the best, but a lot of the time for your home objective it won't matter too much. Hopefully you should have enough units to screen out the enemy so they aren't dropping near you, and they should be able to hold it as well as any other unit. Finally, we have heavy weapon squads, which I thought deserved a mention here, even though I do remain a bit skeptical about how good they are in 9th at the moment. I'm not sure I'd want to rely on these to hold down objectives all by themselves. They're just really quite fragile point for point, and while they do have the better damage output of anything on this list, it means if you put them down on an objective, your opponent has double the reason to try and shoot them, where they can very easily remove a unit that has annoying damage output, as well as clear units off your objective. In general, I think it's just far stronger to use tanks with guns rather than infantry with big guns in the guard army at the moment. For me, I'd be very tempted to hold the back line with infantry squads or veteran squads. You could just use very cheap infantry, but I'd be at least a little bit tempted to throw on a cheap sniper rifle and perhaps a heavy weapon or 2 such as a las cannon. Finally, we come to damage dealing infantry, what I've chosen to call delivered squads in this context. Basically, these are any units that you're investing in trying to get them into optimal strike position, either via protecting them in a Chimera or Valkyrie, or using strategic reserves, the Talon stratagem, or the Dagger of Toussaint to get around behind the enemy. Typically for these guys, I'd expect 1 turn of major damage dealing, and then often dying in return. It's not always definitely the case, but I'd treat any of these guys that survive for another turn of shooting to be a bonus rather than the norm. Obviously conscripts are out for this, and infantry squads, while not terrible, are a bit mediocre. Even with orders and a plasma or melter gun, they're not exactly going to do crazy damage to the enemy. Generally, I'd be looking at veteran squads, special weapons, or command squads for this. Veteran squads if you want a big unit to stack buffs on. Special weapons and command squads if you just want the most special weapon damage per point. As we said, you can get quite a lot of gear on veteran squads. I'd be looking at a core of plasma guns or melter guns, and then I'd even consider upgrades such as a plasma pistol or heavy flamer if you're pretty set on finding a way of getting them within 12 inches. Targeting these guys with the orders can be some of the most efficient uses for orders. In infantry terms, they are pretty much the premier damage dealers of the guard army. For special weapons or command squads, I'd generally be looking to field them with 3 plasma or 3 melter, certainly for the special weapon squads where they're massively discounted compared with the other weapon options, and then likely 3 or 4 of them on the command squads, who do pay more for them, but they're ballistic skill 3+. These guys are really quite easy to deliver to the front lines. You can put a lot of them in strategic reserve for just a couple of CP and have them pop up all over the board, or pack multiple units into transports, things like Chimeras or Valkyries. I'd certainly think about Tempestus Scions for this role as well. They have full free range deep strike, and particularly if you are taking a full Scion detachment alongside a guard one, they will get some other benefits as well, such as Lambden Lions +1 AP. Just as a couple of examples for these guys, you can make quite a nasty outflanking death bomb with special weapons and command squads. Here we have 3 special weapons armed with 3 plasma guns each, and 3 command squads each with 4 melter guns. 351 points for 21 special weapons in outflank, and 2 CP to put them in strategic reserve. It means the opponent will have to be wary of the edge of the board or screen it out very well if they don't want some of their biggest assets melted with melter and plasma. I've also just made one example of a veteran loadout in a Chimera. They've taken a Chimera with 2 heavy flamers and a storm bolter, and the veteran squads are going for maximum plasma weapons, a plasma pistol, 3 plasma guns, and a heavy flamer. I've also chosen to give them shotguns as well, as there's at least a reasonable chance they might get into 6-inch range when they do disembark. Alongside them we have a platoon commander armed with a plasma pistol for just 1 more shot, and he'll give them reroll 1s to hit, so hopefully they won't be melting themselves with their own plasma quite as easily. I still wouldn't say that mechanized veterans are one of the strongest units in the guard decks. In general, I prefer the outflanking special weapons and command squads, combined with tanks like demolisher cannons to really try and put some hurt on heavies, but they could still certainly be annoying as a threat that your opponent can't really ignore, moving up the centre of the board in a durable transport. So I hope some of that discussion has helped around infantry squads, veterans and conscripts. For me it really depends on the battlefield role, largely infantry with maybe a conscript squad or 2 to advance onto the field, infantry squads or veterans to sit behind on home field objectives, and then for me likely special weapon squads or command squads if you do want some guys jumping around dealing damage. Of course there's plenty of ways to run a guard army, and I'm certainly all ears to any other ideas. Look forward to reading your thoughts down in the comments below. If you've enjoyed the video then feel free to subscribe to Auspex Tactics. As I said, we'll hopefully be doing a few more guard videos over the next few weeks. Maybe we'll talk about Bulgarin again next time. Finally, if you have been enjoying my videos, I would just like to mention that the channel has a Patreon page which you can find down in the video description. Making all of the content does take a fair amount of time, and if you are enjoying regularly, any support is massively appreciated. Channel patrons do get a few bonuses, such as seeing certain new videos early, regular votes to see what sort of things come next on the channel, and automatic entry to the Auspex Tactics prize giveaway with a chance to win some big model kits. If any of that sounds good to you, or you'd just like to help support, then the link is down in the video description below. In any case, a massive thank you for listening, and I'll hope to see you guys next time.